welcome. We invite you to take your seats so that our Yom Kippur Symposium may begin. Please come in, take your seats. Our Yom Kippur Symposium begins. Thank you. As our Yom Kippur Symposium begins, let me share with you again that our speakers have prepared well and personally. By invitation, they are invited to address the theme, How Judaism Has Shaped My Life. Our Yom Kippur program has listed their names in the order that they were printed, but not in the order in which they will speak. So let me share with you the order in which they will speak and remind us through their program. Tom Fish, Karen Harburg, Scott Candor, Andy Weiner. I'm so grateful that you're here and grateful to each of them. And so as we enter quietly and are seated, our program will begin. It's a pleasure to invite now Tom Fish to come forward.
All right. Shana Tova. For years, this symposium has been one of my family's most favorite High Holy Day services. I've been humbled and moved by the testaments from this bema of amazing courage and strength of the human spirit to persevere through seemingly insurmountable life challenges. In fact, each year, I pray more intensely at this service than at any other during the High Holy Days. Dear God, I beseech you, please may I never be a symposium speaker. Thank God I'm blessed with a wonderful family, parents who are alive and with us today, fantastic colleagues that I work with, and Lily, the world's greatest dog. I can ask for nothing more. So if you're expecting a plot twist later in this talk, there really aren't any. Kanahora, Kanahora. I grew up on the west side of Houston with a lightly sprinkled Jewish upbringing and very few Jewish friends. Without pressure from my parents, something did compel me to become a bar mitzvah when in 1975 at Beth Israel, it wasn't a given to do so. Our new head rabbi, who had just arrived and we didn't yet know very well, would bar mitzvah me. So the week of my ceremony, my mother wanted me to be blessed by her rabbi and took me to see Rabbi Shachtel. It was just the two of us in his study. He raised his hands above my head and recited in that godly baritone voice, Yivareka Adonai v'yishmerecha, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And my head is bowed, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? There is no one here to see this, and he's blessing me anyway. This must be for real. By the way, that new rabbi was Rabbi Karf, and Rabbi, you have no idea what a profound influence you were on me. I went to Westchester High School. Those were great years. I was a football-playing, girl-chasing, beer-chugging, tobacco-chewing, hunting and fishing Jew. I know that there's not that many of us. I stayed with religious school, kicking and screaming all along the way through confirmation, probably because I don't think they flunked anybody out back then. But in that hallway is a picture of the confirmation class of 1978 with me and my disco hair, and I'm proud to be alongside so many others who are members of this congregation today. I went on to the University of Texas, college, that opportunity to push the reset button and reinvent myself. And I could have done that. I could have left my high school buddies, joined a Jewish fraternity, and surrounded myself with more Jewish people. Instead, I stayed within my comfort zone and joined a non-Jewish fraternity, and I often get asked why I made that choice. The honest answer is, I just didn't have the courage to change what I had always known. In retrospect, like so many other decisions, there were trade-offs in my life. I made lifelong friends, but I missed out on the opportunities in those all-important college years to form bonds with many other Jews. And I think about that decision to this day. However, being in a non-Jewish environment at that time had unintended consequences. It actually awakened that part of my identity. It was a quiet, constant ringing in my ears that became a gravitational pull towards my religion. What may well have been encounters with anti-Semitism instead registered to me simply as a lack of awareness and exposure to Jews and Judaism. And I felt called to become kind of a brand ambassador to our faith, to do my small part to dispel the myths that those who were not exposed to our religion might have grown up with. And it made me realize that marrying within my faith was important to me. Maybe the biggest plus of all is that I got some of my crazies out before Sherry Lewis ever really got to know me. Because if she had, we would have never ended up together. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there are just some things you cannot unsee. I met her in class my sophomore year. She was a beautiful, blonde, brilliant, ZBT little sister, Texas cowboy sweetheart. And she was Jewish. Sherry had been raised at Beth Yeshurun, sitting in services next to her grandfather. She was so far out of my league that asking her on a date would have been like facing a Verlander fastball. So we were just friends. But my life changed our junior year when she accepted an offer for a ride back to Houston. This short road trip was my chance to try to impress her just enough for her to say yes to a date. As reluctant as she was to date a friend, she said yes. And well, things went pretty good from there. 2.5 years later, we were married, and those who know us will agree that was the day I won the lottery. 2.5 years later, we had Stephanie, followed very quickly by Bubba and then Stacy. Our family was complete, and we went about our lives of raising 3 children, juggling career and family, wondering how we pay our mortgage, and experiencing all the joys and struggles of being a young family. Sherry was all in as a mom, and she was always there for our kids. Like many dads, I tried to manage my career and my own selfish indulgences with the opposing force of being a father who was truly present. The cell phone, the BlackBerry, the emails, the golf games, and the duck hunts were a distraction. And as much as I'd hoped to be a constantly engaged father, I'd let some things get in the way. Although not always front and center, Judaism was a presence in our family. My dad would tell me what his father told him. Your religion is like a comfortable old pair of shoes. It feels really good to wear, and it's always there for you. Well, I wanted to wear those shoes more, so I got involved in the Jewish community. And you know what? Dad was right. It felt really good. To this day, I'm grateful to people like Barry and Bobby, Stan, and my Uncle Elliot, who are blessings to our community and unknowingly inspired me to get involved. In some small way, I tried to make up for the lost time and establish those Jewish connections that I missed out earlier in my life. Sherry went back to school part-time and got her master's in counseling, which she's used to help so many. As a junior in high school, and after several years of carrying a heavy secret, our son Bubba came out as gay to his friends and family. What? Wait a minute. I don't understand. I'm a duck hunting, golf playing, tequila drinking, longhorn frat boy. I got a dog named Hank and a son named Bubba. How can he be gay? Accepting someone else who is gay, no problem. But this was my son. And I really struggled with this. And in typically Jewish fashion, I blame myself. Maybe if I'd have been a better father. How could I possibly muster up the courage to deal with this in my world? And the answer, of course, was hiding in plain sight. If I could only be half as brave as Bubba was for dealing with it in his world. Fortunately, I was surrounded by my wife, my family, my friends, and our Rabbi Lion, all of whom had the wisdom to get to the right answer before I could. Sherry was a constant reminder that love is unconditional. My children, an example of how enlightened their generation is. My friends were still my friends. And lo and behold, I wasn't the only father of a gay child. My rabbi and my Judaism were there to help me know that this was not Bubba's issue, this was my issue. And of all the things I wrestled with, I didn't have to reconcile who he was with our religious beliefs. As Reformed Jews, we've led the way in embracing all of our children as God's gifts to us. And I thank God this happened when it did and where it did, at a time when our society is so much more accepting, and in this great city of Houston, which is truly a beacon of diversity and tolerance. But still, to fully accept what was not part of my plan was a journey that took me far longer than it should have. As a knucklehead, I can tell you it takes a while to stop being a knucklehead. But in 2018, Rabbi Lion officiated when Bubba married his partner, Aaron Lieberman, who is a great son to us and who we are so fortunate to have in our lives. It was a cathartic moment for me, as it was the destination of my journey of acceptance. And it is both a humbling and grateful experience when those around you help to bring you to a place that you might not have been able to get to on your own. To quote my favorite High Holy Day prayer, birth is a beginning, from foolishness to discretion, and then perhaps to wisdom. 7 months later, Rabbi Lion officiated when Stephanie married her love, Jeff Eisenbaum, a local Bel Air boy with a great guy from a loving family. And again, we are so lucky that they found each other. Sherry and I laughed when we talked about their lovely wedding. The nice Emory Weiner Jewish girl marries a nice Bel Air Jewish boy. It just seems so easy. Our youngest, Stacy, is in a committed relationship with Connor Callahan, an Irish Catholic, true gentleman and die-hard Yankees fan. No stranger to our faith, Connor was raised in the midst of a Jewish community in New York, and he was a Sammy at Cornell. Connor and I are kindred spirits. He tells me I drink like I'm Irish. But I'm in my mid-50s now, and I'm discovering the mixed blessing of being middle-aged. The aches and pains that used to come from worrying about what's not truly important or what I cannot control now emanate from my muscles and joints. I guess that's a pretty fair trade. It is both regretful and comforting to accept my perspective is different from the Tom Fish of 10 years ago. To quote the same High Holy Day prayer, from ignorance to knowing, from offense to forgiveness. For 35 years, Sherry has been my best friend, my true north, and the lighthouse of our family. Our most important achievement is that we sit at a dinner table together with our children and their significant others, and we laugh and we joke and we rib each other and we argue about politics and sports, and everybody truly likes each other. By all measures, my cup runneth over. I can't stand here today before you and tell you what a good, observant Jew I am. However, I can attest to that quiet, steady, gravitational force that Judaism has been in my life. It literally took me until my mid-40s sitting in this sanctuary, hearing once again the story of God's covenant with Abraham, when it finally dawned on me. This was the only explanation for me to understand how this small, gifted, and persecuted group of people could have possibly survived for so long. Like Dad says, that old pair of shoes we call Judaism has always been there for me, even when I wasn't attentive to it. And I am indebted to so many who gave it to me and taught me to be proud to wear it. I've learned to forgive myself for my shortcomings of living a Jewish life and to be grateful for the moments of comfort and warmth that being a part of this community has given to me. As assimilated as our society is today, and as accustomed as I am to being in a non-Jewish world, there are still moments when I feel like I don't quite fit in. And you know what? That's okay, because being of a common faith may just be the most powerful human bond that exists. And while as much as I hope for the world to transcend our differences, I respect and embrace that divergence of beliefs. For that is what makes a day like today, and a place like Beth Israel and the people within it, so special to me. Shana Tova.
Thank you to Tom. It's a pleasure now to invite Karen Harburg.
Yom Tov, good afternoon. I'm Karen Robinson Harburg, and it's an honor to share my journey of how Judaism has shaped my life with you today. I was born in Houston in 1957. The 610 loop wasn't built yet, and everyone I knew lived in the same zip code. It was a simpler time in Houston. My childhood was perfect. I was the third child of 4 children. My first memory is of my naming, when the rabbi charged my parents with bringing me to a life of Torah, chuppah, the marriage canopy, and ma'asim tovim, a life of good deeds. I was a good listener even at an early age. I loved school, loved being part of a big family, loved my friends, loved being Jewish. I was involved in everything. My early childhood memories include family Shabbat dinners with my father's parents who lived 2 blocks from us, and Sunday night dinners with my mother's parents, my uncle, and my great-grandmother. I grew up at Congregation Bris Shalom, where my parents, Mallory, my mother is in the audience today, and Sam Robinson of blessed memory were founding memories. When I say I grew up at Bris Shalom, I mean it literally. We never missed a Jewish celebration at Bris Shalom. We moved to Memorial in 1968 when I was away at Echo Hill Ranch, a non-competitive Jewish ranch camp in the Texas Hill Country, my favorite place on earth. Shabbat at Echo Hill was special and included blessings over the candles, the wine, and the challah. Creative services outside with music and guitars made lasting memories for me. Several of my camp friends are still my good friends today, over 50 years later. In 1970, I was called to the Torah, the first charge of my parents, as a bat mitzvah, and took my place among the adults at Bris Shalom, a very egalitarian congregation. Women were not only allowed, but encouraged to lead the entire service. Becoming a bat mitzvah was a defining moment in my life. I took the responsibilities of being an adult in the eyes of my Jewish community to heart and have always strived to be a contributing member of the Jewish community. In high school, I joined the B'nai B'rith Youth Organization. Following in my parents' and siblings' footsteps, I jumped into BBYO with both feet. I was every chapter officer, district president, and attended every leadership conference and Kala that was offered. BBG was my first experience being involved in service to others, which prepared me for a life of ma'asim tovim, a life of good deeds. In the back of my mind, I kept hearing the rabbi say, a life of Torah, chuppah, and ma'asim tovim. After graduating from high school, I attended Tulane University in New Orleans. Best decision ever. Within a few days after starting college, I attended a Jewish fraternity party. The usual questions at these parties were, where are you from and what are you going to major in? Since I was from Houston, I kept getting introduced to this cute and funny guy who was also from Houston and had also graduated from Memorial High School. Yes, you guessed it. That cute and funny guy is still cute and funny. By the summer after my freshman year, and he's turning red, I can see. By the summer after my freshman year, I knew Jay and I were soulmates and we would marry. After Jay graduated from Tulane University, he went to law school at the University of Houston, and I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin to pursue a Bachelor of Science degree in nutrition and dietetics. After my junior year, I transferred again to the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, and Jay and I married that summer. Coming from a conservative congregation, I have always said that I had to convert when I got married, and Jay always says he married outside of the faith. Our upbringings were very different, both definitely Jewish, but definitely different. Before we got married, I agreed we would join Beth Israel, where I had never set foot inside the door, and Jay agreed we would not have a Christmas tree in our home. We were married under the chuppah at Bris Shalom with 4 rabbis officiating, Rabbi Yaskowitz, Rabbi Shachtel, Rabbi Kahana, and Rabbi Fogg. I think that checks off the chuppah box. Jay and I recently celebrated our 41st anniversary, and as I often tell Jay, we are off to a great start. My favorite love quote describes how I feel about Jay. If you live to be 100, I want to live to be 100 minus 1 day, so I would never have to live a day without you. I will never forget my first High Holy Days at Beth Israel. I walked in and was surprised to see the men were not wearing yarmulkes or talit. When the organist struck that first booming chord, I thought I was going to jump out of my seat. Beth Israel has been my spiritual home for over 40 years, and I could not feel more comfortable here if I had grown up here. I have always loved the rituals, food, and culture of being Jewish. Passover was a special holiday in our home that I look forward to every year. When I was young, the Seder was at my grandparents' home, then my parents' home, and for over the last 25 plus years, we have hosted over 40 participants each year for Seder in our home. Hanukkah was another special holiday for our family. From our son Michael's first Hanukkah through his bar mitzvah, our family hosted a big Hanukkah party with latkes, Hanukkah cookies, and craft projects. Each guest brought a non-perishable food, which we donated to local food pantries. Our modest party grew from a handful of friends to over 200 guests. Jay and I both finished school in 1980 and started our careers. Our lives have always revolved around the Jewish calendar and Jewish life cycle events, most of them at Beth Israel. There was our son Michael's Brit Milah, our 2 daughters, Kimberly's and Jamie's namings, consecrations, bar and bat mitzvahs, confirmations, high school religious school graduation, our daughter's wedding, and now the icing on the cake, the Brit Milah for our 2 grandsons and our granddaughter. Life is good. In 1982, we were truly blessed with the birth of our first child, Michael. He was beautiful, bright, curious, and a complete delight. 2 years later, we were again blessed with the birth of our first daughter, Kimberly. She was also beautiful, strong-willed, and quick-witted. 3 years later came our second daughter, Jamie. Our family was complete. We were so busy with 3 children under 5 years old and 2 developing careers. Within a few weeks after Jamie was born, we knew she was not developing like her older brother and sister. The contrast was stark, and we began a lifelong journey. When Jamie was about 4 months old, a bird struck a window in my parents' home. The sound was like a sonic boom, and yet Jamie, who had been lying on a playmat in the same room, hadn't flinched. We realized that Jamie was virtually deaf with severe asymptomatic ear infection. What followed were years of treatments and various surgeries. When Jamie was about 6 months old, Jay's father of blessed memory, who was chief of surgery at Texas Children's Hospital, referred us to our pediatric neurologist and wonderful friend, Bob Zeller. Years later, we would learn that Jamie had a genetic chromosome abnormality. However, at this point, we had been told by other well-intentioned doctors that Jamie would likely never learn to talk, certainly wouldn't read or write, probably wouldn't walk, and that we should consider finding an institution which would take care of Jamie for us. Dr. Zeller's advice was to take Jamie to physical therapy. It won't hurt her, he said, and it might help her mother. My father-in-law often said, "The Lord helps those who help themselves." Truer words were never spoken. This set the wheels in motion of 18 years of physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and academic support for Jamie. There has never been a day since Jamie was born that no matter what happened, good or bad, that I don't go to sleep without thinking, but oh my God, what is going to happen to Jamie? When I first began taking Jamie to physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy, there was a story titled "A Trip to Holland" posted on the sign-in window. It goes something like this. You spend your entire life planning for a trip to Holland. You read about Holland, learn the traditions, customs, and history of Holland in preparation for the trip of a lifetime to Holland. You get off the airplane and you have arrived in Italy. Well, Italy is nice, but it is not Holland. I had planned for a trip to Holland, and I was in Italy. I loved Italy, but it was not Holland. This metaphor was life-changing for me. I recognized at that moment that we would be responsible for Jamie for the rest of her life. I kept hearing the words that this time Rabbi Karf spoke at Jamie's naming. My responsibility to her, as her Jewish parent, was to bring her to Torah, Chuppah, and Ma'asim Tovim. When Jamie was 3, we were looking for a new home. I discovered that I knew more about the homes than the agents, so I decided to get my real estate license. Guess what? I was right. Second best decision ever. I started my second career in 1990 selling real estate and never looked back. This career has been rewarding to me and has allowed me to be a partner in providing for our family for the last 29 years. While working full-time selling real estate, I was involved in Michael, Kimberly, and Jamie's schools, Beth Israel Sisterhood, various committees at Beth Israel, the Board of Trustees at Beth Israel, the Chevra Kadisha, the Jewish Burial Society, Jewish Family Service, and other community organizations, including the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. Being Jewish is part of my everyday existence, and giving back to others and the community is part of my Jewish fabric. Check off box number 3, Ma'asim Tovim, living a life of good deeds. Jamie continued to develop and thrive along with her brother and sister. Jamie became a bat mitzvah on this very bima, following in Michael and Kimberly's footsteps. Jamie read and chanted her Torah portion expertly, and when she finished with her Divrei Torah, honor thy father and thy mother, spontaneous applause erupted, and there was not a dry eye in the entire congregation. Jay tells me Beth Israel charged us extra to pick up all the Kleenex, but it was worth it. Jamie graduated from Memorial High School and, following in her brothers and sisters' footsteps, insisted on a college experience. We found the Chapel Haven School in New Haven, Connecticut, where Jamie spent 2 years in a college-like experience learning independent living skills. Jamie is now 32 and recently completed a 1-year hospital employment internship at Yale New Haven Hospital. If you don't know Jamie, despite the dire predictions, she not only talks, reads, and writes, but is inquisitive, funny, social, has an amazing memory, and a fabulous singing voice, and, if given the opportunity, will talk your ears off. Jamie lives a productive life she loves in a community of adults with cognitive disabilities. Thanks in part to Beth Israel's inclusiveness in the religious school program, Jamie loves being Jewish and celebrates Jewish holidays at her synagogue and at the Jewish Family Service of New Haven. Just as Italy isn't Holland, New Haven isn't Houston, but it's a great place for Jamie. God made me Jamie's mother for a reason, and Jamie my daughter for a reason. We have been good for each other. Jamie brought to our family a culture of patience, kindness, and an appreciation for every individual's special abilities. We would not be the same family without Jamie. Faith, a lot of determination, and not listening to the naysayers has paid off. When Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, our home had no flooding. However, I experienced my own personal flood with my health. I couldn't breathe. As Harvey moved through, I began a 6-month journey that included 6 visits to the emergency room, including my terrifying 911 emergency ambulance ride, multiple hospital admissions, open lung surgery, pulmonary rehabilitation, massive doses of steroids, and full-time oxygen use for a month. I named the stout oxygen tank I dragged around Altuve. I spent months recuperating and working from home. I know it was the hospital visit from Rabbi Lyon that initiated my road to recovery. Each week throughout my recovery, I found great joy and comfort in participating via live stream in our Shabbat services and the High Holy Day services. I had never missed a High Holy Day service in my life, and my illness was not going to stop me. I love the spiritual music of our liturgy, and I especially appreciated the rabbis in Candor saying this and singing a special Misha Baruch for me to have a refuah shlema, a full recovery. I am happy to say I am fully recovered. While life has certainly presented us with challenges, we consider ourselves to be extremely lucky and very blessed. When I hear people complain about trivial things, I think to myself, life isn't perfect. Maybe you noticed. Life is what you make of it. Shana Tova.
Very grateful to Karen, and now I'd like to invite Scott Candor.
Unlike my 3 distinguished guests on the bima, I wasn't born in Texas, but got here as fast as I could. In Boston, where we lived before moving to Texas, at the end of Starrow Drive, there's a large sign in front of an apartment complex. If you lived here, you'd be home now. We lived just a few blocks away from Congregation Beth Israel, yet for many years we belonged to another large Reform congregation in town. And so I would say, if we belonged to Beth Israel, we'd be praying by now. 7 years ago, my wife Lisa and I made the complicated decision to move to Beth Israel, but it made sense, and it makes even more sense today. I'll explain, but in order to explain that decision, I have to give you some background on how Judaism has shaped my life. I grew up in Baldwin, New York, a small town on the south shore of Long Island. Jewishly, I grew up in a bubble. Almost all of my elementary school classmates and about a half my middle school classmates were Jewish. And until high school, all of my friends were Jewish. I grew up in a typical Reform Jewish home. My parents belonged to a small Reform synagogue of 300 families. Dad became very active in the congregation. He ran the Bazaar fundraiser and became Men's Club president. And eventually he was promoted to vice president. He was successful at getting congregants to increase their temple dues. I became a bar mitzvah and was confirmed, but 10th grade was the final class in that synagogue's religious school. There was no program after confirmation. At the end of my 11th grade, my parents made a big decision and moved our family to Long Island's North Shore. This move had an incredible impact on me and my Judaism. Our new synagogue offered a way to meet people quickly. I joined the dynamic youth group and the post-confirmation class where the senior rabbi led a seminar entitled Sex and Judaism. This synagogue sure knew how to market to teenagers. At Temple Bethel of Great Neck, I was exposed to creative services and the melodies of nifty composers. In fact, we youth groupers were rather spoiled. Jeff Klepper, the composer of Shalom Rav and other familiar melodies that we sing on Shabbat, was the song leader at our winter break retreat. Towards the end of the senior year, the assistant rabbi said that URJ Camp Coleman in Georgia was looking for new blood. I applied to be a counselor and got the job. But it was a culture shock. At this camp, and maybe this is like Green Family Camp today, people would walk from place to place with their arms around each other. In New York, people barely even touched each other. It was a strange summer. As much as I loved the camp and what the leadership was trying to do by living and being Jewish 24/7, for me it was a very isolating summer as I hadn't grown up with my fellow counselors through youth group and summer camp. Being Jewish at Yale took some adjustment and modification too. When I arrived on campus, I immediately sought out Hillel, but I was frustrated to find there was no Reform group. However, I met this incredibly smart and very sophisticated senior who came from Texas, with a strong Reform background and a passion for getting things done for the Yale Jewish community. Yes, Lisa Stone and I met during that first week at Yale at the Hillel picnic. Towards the end of freshman year, after many late, intense, multi-hour conversations, we became a couple, and we married 5 years later, about 20 minutes from the Yale campus. Lisa created, and I helped to further develop, a group called the Creative Reform Shabbaton, also called the Yale Havara. This was a way to express our spirituality, make connections, and build a community. We created our own Friday night services. Using the basic prayers as a template, we added creative writings and new melodies. It was a success. We started with 8 students meeting once every semester my freshman year, to eventually becoming 15 people meeting every other week my sophomore year, and by graduation time, there were 40 of us meeting every week. Lisa and I have been married for 36 years now. That's double high. We have 3 adult children, Benjamin, Joshua, and Miriam, and we raised them as passionate and committed Reform Jews. For 20 years, Lisa was the principal of Congregation Immanuel's upper school, and so there was absolutely no choice about our children's attendance at religious school. Our kids went through the key life cycle events of consecration, bar and bat mitzvah, confirmation, and graduation, and Joshua married his bride Sarah under the chuppah last year. When our kids were growing up, Friday night Shabbat dinner was at our house. If they wished to go out later with their friends, that was their choice. But typically, they were happy to remain home for a family evening. And living by example, we instilled in them Jewish values, the importance of education, working hard, tzedakah, and tikkun olam, the need to repair the world. And what do? I'm a decision scientist and applied mathematician. Almost 30 years ago, I earned a doctorate in decision sciences, the science of decision-making. I think about decisions in a methodological, quantitative way. I'm a professor at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I research problems in medical decision-making. But MD Anderson is my second employer in Texas. On the job market, way back in the spring of '91, the only advertised job in the country for my degree was at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. As a New Yorker and then New Englander, I wasn't afraid of Texas. After all, Lisa had grown up at Congregation Immanuel in Houston, although for the record, her mother was part of the Congregation Beth Israel confirmation class of 1943, and her photograph is out there on the wall in these halls. I had been going to rodeos and eating Tex-Mex during my annual visits to Lisa's family in Dallas. When my first interviewer, inappropriately I might add, asked me if I was married, I bragged about my wife who grew up in Texas. I was offered the opportunity. I was thrilled to begin my academic career at the oldest medical school in Texas. In 1994, we moved to Meyerland. a move prompted by our Jewish values. The public school wasn't working out for us in Clear Lake, and all the private schools were church-based, and that's at the same time when I joined MD Anderson. So even though we lived in Meyerland, we still drove the 18 minutes to Immanuel. And as I said before, at Immanuel, Lisa was a teacher and the principal of the high school, and she helped start and maintain the scouting program there. And I was active in the religious school PTA, led Daily Minyan, and became a board member. Our community and our history were there. So how did we come over to Beth Israel? To answer that, I have to go back to our earlier days in Houston. After one of the Yom Limud, the Day of Study programs in about 1995, I heard at the time Assistant Rabbi David Lyon speak. Later, I literally bumped into him when he was making his Bikur Holim rounds to visit the sick. How fortunate I was grabbing a sandwich at Methodist Hospital that day, and we agreed to meet for lunch at a later date, and we've been friends ever since. Another fun digression, when Rabbi Lyon moved to East Lansing, Michigan, that was my brother Eric's congregation, and when he moved later to Dallas, that was my in-laws' congregation. So we stayed in touch throughout his rabbinic career, and we were thrilled when he returned to Houston 15 years ago. Fast forward to about 2010 or 2011, I was asked to serve on the Immanuel Vision Committee to help identify what we as a congregation were looking for regarding a future vision for the congregation and what characteristics would be ideal for a new rabbi. Plus, after leading the membership committee, my new role was to chair the retention committee. How can we keep members interested in staying connected to the synagogue? But then the unthinkable happened. Immanuel elected a new senior rabbi, and there were severe challenges with the new leader and the administration of the congregation that led to very emotional, painful consequences for us. How was I to chair the retention committee when I was no longer enthusiastic about the congregation? And at the same time, we had heard about the hiring of a new cantor at Beth Israel. Lisa and I went to a Friday night service, and coincidentally, it was the installation service of the new cantor. Literally, there were chills going up and down my spine, and the hairs on my arm were standing up. I exclaimed to Lisa, "This is what we've been missing at Immanuel. This is how worship should be." We decided to formally join Beth Israel the following year. I should add, and this is important, that my friend and our rabbi, David Lyon, never pressured me to change affiliations, but he was there to support me during this journey. Yes, it was tough leaving friends and people we had worked with on volunteer projects. I remember crying during services at Beth Israel at one point, and David Scott gently checking on me after services to be sure that I was okay. And I was. It was safe to let my guard down here. This place was indeed a sanctuary. I wanted to be connected to Beth Israel and its congregants as quickly as possible. I wanted to become part of the community. Lisa and I went through the new members orientation program, learning about the history of this special place, and met several active members who always enthusiastically greeted us when we saw them. As a lover of karaoke, I joined the new volunteer choir and made connections there. And given my strong belief that every Jew should belong to a synagogue, I took on Executive Director Kathy Knott's challenge to lead the membership committee to get people thinking about the strengths and opportunities of synagogue membership. A few years later, as you well know, in August 2017, the word sanctuary took on that other meaning in a big way, just after Hurricane Harvey did its damage. Yes, we flooded for the first time ever. It was only 8 inches of water, but for those of you who know much about flooding, even an inch of water is enough to ruin so much. For those first few days after the storm, Lisa and I kept a very positive attitude and managed to make significant progress with our cleanup. But coming to services that Friday evening was a powerful moment. I'll read from my Facebook posts, written very late that same Friday night. The past 2 days have been tough. As you can tell from my previous posts, I had been very upbeat all week, but something struck a chord during these past 2 days. Maybe it was helping the 22-year-old son of a friend. He barely escaped from his home, having left through the attic and swimming to a neighbor for safety. All of his clothes in his bureau were sopping wet. He only brought a third of his clothes over, 3 loads worth, to our home, finding other families to wash the other 2/3. Or maybe it was seeing the gigantic piles of trash in front of our neighbors' yards, who lost so much more than we did. Or maybe it was going to Shabbat services earlier this evening and getting asked by synagogue friends and acquaintances, "How did you do?" and being sad to share that we flooded. Or seeing clergy and staff who knew what happened to us, who greeted us with hugs and said, "I'm so sorry." And during services being moved to tears by the beautiful music and the profound words of the rabbi. It was the first time that I cried after the flood. Was it grieving, a loss of innocence, knowing that flood could happen again, tears of joy for being lucky to still have a home, or thanking God I'm still alive and have the opportunity to rebuild? I don't mean to be melodramatic, but there is no question that was a tumultuous and life-changing experience. This talk was supposed to be about how Judaism has shaped my life. To be direct, I'm not sure how Judaism has shaped my life. Rather and simply, Judaism is a basic, innate part of my life. Judaism is part of my nefesh, my soul, and it influences the decisions I make at home and at work. It forms the basis for our family calendar, celebrating Shabbat and the Jewish holidays throughout the year. When I'm on the membership committee or I sing in the volunteer choir, not only do I want Judaism to be part of my own life, but I want Judaism to shape other people's lives as well. For those who want to be a part of it, I want to help create a vibrant and joyous Jewish community. I did this as a camp counselor in Georgia, as a student at my University Hillel, and now as an active participant in our incredible Congregation Beth Israel community. May we all be inscribed in the Book of Life for a healthy and sweet new year. May we all go from strength to strength.
Thank you to Scott. And now I'd like to invite Andy Weiner to speak.
I grew up in a home with a strong Jewish identity. My parents and grandparents practiced Jewish values and were pillars of the Jewish community. Israel was always a topic, and to this day, I follow the happenings of the Jewish state on a daily basis. Jewish values were lived and talked about and became part of my core. How to treat others, do the right thing, honesty, deep respect for others who are in the image of God, treat everyone with honor, pay your bills on time, show up on time. My father and grandfather and uncle ran their business, Weiner Stores, on Jewish values. I have tried to do the same thing with my business, Rockstep Capital. And I've installed 25 rules of behavior, I call them rock steps, at our company, many of them based on Jewish values. Rock step number 1, do the right thing, always. I remember a story about my grandfather, Isidore Weiner, who founded Weiner Stores. During the Depression, he went bankrupt, and he was relieved legally of all of his debts. When he came out of bankruptcy, he took it upon himself to pay back all of his creditors, even to the extent of hiring detectives to track down 2 of his creditors who he could not find. I've been married twice. I have 3 boys, David, Daniel, and Michael, from my first marriage. Their mother was raised Jewish, and her mother and her mother's family were Holocaust survivors. All 3 of my sons were educated here at Schlenker. David and Daniel had their bar mitzvah here with Rabbi Lyon. One of my goals was to do what I could to perpetuate the Jewish people and Jewish values through my children. My hope was that David, Daniel, and Michael would be part of that legacy. During my first marriage of 17 years, I struggled to both live my life with Jewish values and maintain another Jewish value, shalom bayit, peace in the house. This was not to happen. Upon my divorce, a little more than 7 years ago, and while they were in middle school and high school, David, Daniel, and Michael converted to Christianity. They changed their names from Weiner to a non-Jewish name exactly on their 18th birthday. They also chose to not have me be part of their lives. Upon turning 18, all three have been estranged. I've not spoken to David and Daniel in over 6 years, and my youngest son, Michael, in over 2 years. During the last time I was with Michael before he turned 18, I pleaded with him to allow me to be part of his life. In tears, I told him that Jesus had died on the cross to atone the sins of his followers, and that in the spirit of Jesus, and as a believer in Jesus, he should forgive me for whatever sins he thinks I have committed. I've studied the role of marital disharmony and how it can affect family relationships. And I've come to terms with the possibility that the damage from the marital disharmony is so deep that I might never have a relationship with one or all of my children. Given the way I've run my life and the principles that guide it, this possibility of losing my children was never within the realm of possibility. I've had to deal with how I personally managed that family disharmony. I consulted with several rabbis as I struggled with the most difficult challenge I've ever had, managing the destruction of my family. I remember my conversations with Rabbi Lyon and the discussions about the interaction between shalom bayit, my mental health, and how family disharmony was to affect the viability and sustainability of my business. I needed permission, which Rabbi Lyon gave me, to extricate myself from a toxic situation before I was destroyed by it. I suspected that there were going to be consequences from the divorce, but I could not foresee losing all contact with David, Daniel, and Michael. I did not understand that I was facing a trade-off between personal survival and losing my children. And the process of separation was the most brutal process I've ever faced. It was stunningly painful. Intrinsically, I knew, but this really enforced it, that everything in life, everything, has both positive and negative consequences. The negative consequence is that I've lost David, Daniel, and Michael potentially forever. The positive consequence is that after this deep pain and after the divorce, I met, fell in love with, and married the most wonderful person I've ever met. My wife, Meredith, and my stepkids, Morgan and Max, are the best things that ever happened to me. And the Jewish values that Meredith and I share, and the positive energy created by Meredith, has helped me realize growth in every part of my life, even in business. I've learned a number of lessons. In a relationship, nice is a must. And nice on the little things, the day-to-day, the small kindnesses. Besides cherishing the Jewish values I hold dear, Meredith has nice and many, many more things that if I said them here, she'd kill me, which wouldn't be very nice. I've learned that everyone who has lived life for a reasonable amount of time has deep scars. I'm not unique. My pain is no different from others who have physical, emotional, financial, and relationship setbacks. I've learned that everything has consequences. My entire growing up was shaped in the realm of family harmony. I was not equipped to deal with family disharmony. My error was not confronting the conflict earlier, before the damage to myself and my children had set in. I learned that I have to confront conflict earlier, and that I can do it with confidence and with respect, and that at the end of the day, things will be better as a result, and that there are resources that can help manage these issues. I regret not exploring the relationship between my Jewish values and Shalom Bayit earlier in my first marriage, before the deep damage occurred to my family. I abandoned my Jewish values in order to keep the family together. Looking back, that was my mistake. Had I stayed true to those values and explored the conflict between those values and Shalom Bayit, then maybe I could have saved my family, my business, my health. On the other hand, the slow and deliberate nature, plus my ability to absorb tremendous pain, led me to a very small opening in terms of timing, where I met Meredith, and I've been able to achieve a deep and rich happiness with her. It wasn't a trade-off. I didn't trade the destruction of a family for a magnificent, blessed life with Meredith, Morgan, and Max. But it happened that way. Without the pain and length of suffering, I would have not known the difference and wouldn't have been in this magnificent place in life. My strong desire to perpetuate the Jewish values I've grown up with have been realized in the deep satisfaction, meaning, and purpose resulting from the relationship with Meredith, Morgan, and Max. It's what I have been searching for. As a family, we've taken several meaningful trips to explore our Jewish heritage. Along with my mother-in-law, Betty Steinfeld, we went to Israel and Poland. We absorbed our history and culture and witnessed both the tragedy of the Holocaust and the triumph of Israel, its prosperity, its life. In spite of what happened to my relationship with David, Daniel, and Michael, I've learned that I can still feel blessed. I have the perfect partner and stepchildren. I've hit the jackpot. I'm stunningly thrilled with my life, and I pray every day for David, Daniel, and Michael that they find happiness in their lives and that one day they reconnect with me. Lashana Tova, Happy New Year to everyone. May you have a year of happiness, health, meaning, and lots of little nice.
Let's thank all of our speakers one more time. Our afternoon service begins shortly, and the alternative service begins in Levitt Hall.